Everyone in Chicago feared Dante Castellano. He was the Don who had buried 3 rivals before his 30th birthday, the man whose silence could empty a room faster than a drawn pistol. But there was one rumor that followed him into every whispered corner of the underworld. One weakness his enemies prayed was true. They said the great Dante Castellano was impotent. They said no woman had ever warmed his bed, that the ice in his chest had frozen the man inside him. They laughed about it in back rooms from Naples to New York, and Dante let them. He let them believe it because the truth was worse than any rumor. The truth was that he had made a promise 11 years ago that he could not break, and he had kept it through every temptation his enemies sent to snap it. Until the night a quiet Italian maid named Seraphina Bianchi walked into his mansion carrying a silver tray and the gold ring on his left hand, the one he turned, always turned, whenever something inside him began to move, went still for the first time in 11 years. He didn't know yet that she wasn't just a maid. He didn't know that every movement she made, every downcast glance, every soft-spoken yes, sir, was a performance more dangerous than any blade he had ever held. The man who had vowed never to feel again was about to meet the only woman in the world who could make him break that vow, and she had come to his house for one reason: to kill him. The Castellano estate sat on 40 acres of frozen lakefront outside Chicago, a stone fortress disguised as a home. Gothic spires clawed at a bruised November sky. Black SUVs patrolled the perimeter like wolves on a leash. Inside, beneath Murano chandeliers that cost more than most men earned in a lifetime, the silence was curated. Servants moved like ghosts. Conversations died the moment Dante Castellano entered a room. He was 34 years old, 6 feet 3 inches of restrained violence in a charcoal suit, with a jaw cut from something harder than stone and eyes the exact color of winter lake ice. On the smallest finger of his left hand, he wore a heavy gold signet ring engraved with a griffin. It had belonged to his father. It had belonged to his father's father before him. When Dante was thinking, when Dante was calculating, when Dante was holding back something inside himself that wanted to come out, he turned the ring on his finger. One revolution. A pause. Another revolution. Every man who had sat across a negotiating table from Dante Castellano in the last 11 years had learned to watch that ring. When the ring stopped turning, someone had already been decided against. He was 11 years old the morning his father died. He had been sitting at the breakfast table in the small sunroom off the kitchen, a plate of buttered pastry in front of him, a cup of hot chocolate that Alda had made with too much milk the way he liked it. His father had been in the foyer. His father had been putting on his coat to go to a meeting in the city. He had heard his father laugh at something one of the men said. It was a short laugh, a real one. It was the last sound his father ever made. The shots came a second later, 3 of them very close together and then a 4th, farther apart. He remembered the way his mother screamed. He remembered the pastry falling out of his hand. He remembered the hot chocolate cooling in its cup while the house filled with the sound of running feet and shouting, and after a very long time, sirens. He remembered that nobody came for him. He sat at that breakfast table for 2 hours because nobody remembered he was there. When Alda finally found him, the chocolate had a skin on it. She had carried him out of the sunroom with his face pressed into her neck, and he had not cried, and he had not spoken, and somewhere between the sunroom and the upstairs hallway he had stopped being a child. He went to them that night. He was 11 years old and he had a list of names he had memorized from overhearing his father's phone calls, and he went to the oldest of his father's captains and he said, "I want to know which one of them did it." The captain had looked at him for a long time. The captain had said, "You are a boy." And Dante Castellano, 11 years old, had said back, "I am the last Castellano. Tell me the name." The captain had told him, not that night. It took a year. But the captain had told him, and by the time Dante was 12, the name was in the ground, and Dante had learned the thing that would define the next 23 years of his life. A Castellano does not mourn with tears. A Castellano mourns with the names of the men he has buried. By 23, when he inherited the throne properly, every man who had been in the house the morning his father was shot was already dead. By 30, Dante Castellano was the most feared Don in the Midwest, and the loneliest. The rumor about his impotence had started 5 years earlier. A woman named Beatrice, sent by his uncles to tempt him into producing an heir, had spent 2 nights at the estate and never once made it past the threshold of his bedroom. He had left her at the door of a guest suite, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and gone to sleep alone in a room she never saw the inside of. She had talked. Women who were sent to the Castellano estate and turned away at the threshold always talked. Within a month, the whispers had reached every family on the eastern seaboard. Dante Castellano could not. Dante Castellano would not. They called him the Frozen Dawn. They called him the Eunuch King. And Dante, who had spent his entire adult life learning that every weapon you handed your enemies would one day be turned against you, had done something strange. He had agreed with them. He had let the rumor grow. Because the truth was something Dante Castellano had never spoken aloud, not even to himself in the privacy of his own mind. The truth was that he had loved a girl once. He had loved her when he was 23 and she had been 20, and she had been a week away from being his wife. And when she died, he had made her a promise, and the promise had cost him 11 years of his life and the inside of his own heart. He had made peace with that. He had built a fortress around the empty place in his chest, and he had decided that a man who could not love was a man his enemies could not wound. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in late November, Mrs. Alda, the head housekeeper, brought a new girl to his study, and Dante Castellano's 11-year vow began to crack. Signor Castellano, this is Seraphina. She will be handling the East Wing and the private library. Her references are exceptional. She comes from the Rossi household in Milan. Dante didn't look up from the ledger he was reviewing. He never looked up. New staff were beneath his notice unless they proved themselves a threat. His thumb moved across the ring on his little finger, half a turn. Fine. She speaks 4 languages, Signor. Italian, English, French, and Russian. I thought perhaps the private library. Fine, Alda, show her the rooms. There was a pause, a small pause, but Dante noticed it because Dante noticed everything. It was the pause of a woman not used to being dismissed. He lifted his eyes. Seraphina Bianchi was 26 years old. She stood with her hands folded neatly in front of her white apron, her dark hair pulled back in a severe low bun, her eyes cast respectfully toward the floor. She was beautiful in the way dangerous things sometimes are, the kind of beauty you only recognized if you were looking. Dante was looking. He was looking because her hands were wrong. They were too still. The hands of an ordinary maid fidgeted. They tucked hair, they smoothed aprons, they moved without the wearer's permission. Seraphina's hands did not move. They rested exactly where she had placed them, one folded over the other, as still as the hands of a woman who had learned stillness the hard way. And on the inside of her left wrist, just barely visible beneath the starched cuff of her uniform, was a thin white scar. The kind of scar that came from a knife, a specific kind of knife. The kind of scar you got in training when you had not yet learned to disarm a blade without catching it. Dante knew that scar. He had seen it on soldiers. He had one himself, higher up on his forearm, covered now by the cuff of his custom shirt. His thumb turned the signet ring. 1 full revolution. 2. Look at me, Seraphina. She raised her eyes. They were gray. The exact gray of winter lake ice, and for one disorienting second Dante Castellano felt as though he were looking into a mirror. Welcome to my home, he said quietly. Grazie, signor. Her voice was soft, perfectly modulated, the voice of a well-trained domestic. But her eyes did not lower again until he gave her permission, and Dante Castellano had not given any woman permission to hold his gaze in 11 years. When Alda let her out, Dante stood at the window and watched the 2 women cross the courtyard below. He watched the way Seraphina walked. She walked too well. Maids shuffled. Soldiers walked like that. He picked up his phone. His other hand kept turning the ring. The new girl, Seraphina Bianchi, Rossi household in Milan. I want every record, birth certificate, school transcripts, every job she has held since she was 15. I want it on my desk by morning. Sai, signor. Anything specific you are looking for? Dante watched the small figure in the black uniform disappear into the service entrance. I want to know why a woman trained to hold a knife is serving tea in my house. The reports arrived at 6 a.m. They were immaculate. Seraphina Bianchi, born in a small village in Calabria, orphaned at 12, raised by an elderly aunt, employed at the Rossi household for 8 years. Excellent performance reviews, no criminal record. On paper, she was exactly what she appeared to be. On paper. Dante read the file 3 times and then dropped it on his desk and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Because here was the thing about Dante Castellano. He was the most feared man in the Midwest because he had never, not once in his entire career, trusted paper over instinct. And every instinct he had was screaming that the woman downstairs polishing his mother's silver was not what she said she was. He could have fired her. That would have been the safe move. The Dante move. He could have told Alda there had been a mistake, sent the girl away, and watched from the window to see where she went and who she met. Instead, he put on his jacket and went downstairs to watch her work. She was in the library. She had her back to him when he entered, and she was running a soft cloth along the spines of the first editions in the glass case by the fireplace. She was humming. It was an old Sicilian song, a song his grandmother had sung to him when he was a boy. He had not heard that song in 20 years, and the sound of it in his mother's library, coming from a woman with a knife scar on her wrist, made something behind his ribs go very still. His thumb stopped on the ring. It did not turn. "Where did you learn that tune?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. She did not flinch. That was the first thing he noticed. Any other maid in his house would have jumped out of her skin at the sound of his voice appearing behind her without warning. Seraphina simply turned, set the cloth on the table, folded her hands, and looked at him with those winter-gray eyes. "My mother, signor, she was from Palermo." "Palermo?" "Yes, signor." Dante crossed the room slowly. He stopped an arm's length from her. He did not touch her. He had not touched a woman in 11 years. He noticed with a small, distant part of his mind that every muscle in his body was aware of how little air separated his hand from her shoulder. "Your mother's name?" "Rosa, signor." "When did she die?" "When I was 12. "How?" A pause, a very small pause, the pause of a woman measuring what to say. "An illness, signor." "That is a lie." The room went very still. She did not deny it. She did not confirm it. She simply lifted her chin a fraction of an inch and waited. And Dante Castellano, who had just caught a member of his own staff in a direct lie, felt something he had not felt in 11 years. He felt interested. "There is a scar on your wrist," he said softly. "Yes, signor." "How did you get it?" "I fell on a piece of broken glass when I was a child." "That is also a lie. That is a training scar. The kind you get in your first year of close-quarter blade work when you have not yet learned to move your wrist out of the angle." He watched her face. Not a flicker, not a twitch. Just the steady gray stillness of a woman who had been trained, somewhere, in some room he had never seen, by someone who had taught her that the face was a mask and the eyes were a door and the door stayed closed. "Finish the library, Seraphina. I will see you at dinner. You will serve my table personally tonight." "Yes, signor." He turned and walked out, and he did not see the way her hands began to shake the moment the door closed behind him. He did not see her sink down into the leather chair by the fire. He did not see her press both hands against her mouth. He did not see her whisper, in a voice that was not the voice of a maid at all, Madonna mia. He knows, and he has not killed me yet. Why? That night at dinner, Dante sat at the head of a table built for 20 and ate alone the way he always did. Seraphina poured his wine. Her hand did not shake. He watched her the way a man watches a predator across a clearing, with still attention and a slow building awareness that something in the room had changed. "Sit down. Signor, sit at the table, there." He gestured at the chair to his right. "Signor, it would not be appropriate." "Sit, Seraphina." She sat. She sat with the same composed stillness she did everything else, and Dante poured her a glass of his own wine with his own hands. A small part of his mind noted that he had not poured wine for another human being since his mother died. "Tell me about the Rossi household." "It was a good position, signor. Signora Rossi was kind. Signor Rossi was often traveling." "And why did you leave?" "Signor Rossi passed away. The family closed the estate." "Convenient." "Signor." A dead employer is a perfect reference. No one to contradict what you say about yourself. She lifted her wine glass, and for the first time Dante saw the shape of a smile at the corner of her mouth. It was not a servant's smile. "You do not believe I am who I say I am." "No. May I ask what you believe I am?" "I do not know yet. That is what bothers me." She turned the glass in her fingers. The firelight caught the rim and sent a ribbon of red light across her knuckles. "Signor Castellano, may I speak honestly?" "Yes. I have worked in the houses of wealthy and dangerous men my entire adult life. I have learned to make myself small because small women survive. If I appear to you to be hiding something, perhaps it is only because I have learned that being seen is the fastest way to get hurt. Forgive me if my stillness offends you." It was a beautiful answer. It was a perfect answer. It was, Dante thought, the answer of a woman who had rehearsed it. He studied her across the rim of his wine glass. Her throat moved when she swallowed. There was a pulse point at the base of it, a small living thing beating under her skin, and Dante Castellano realized he was staring at it and made himself look away. His thumb found the ring. It turned. "Why do you work?" he asked. "Signor, you have languages, you have training, you could teach, you could translate, you could walk into any number of lives that would be easier than pouring wine for a man like me. Why this?" Another pause, this one longer, and for the first time something behind her eyes cracked, something true. "Because I have always lived in houses that belong to other people, Signor. I do not know how to live in one that belongs to me." Dante set his wine down. Something inside his chest was doing something he did not have a name for. His thumb stopped on the ring. It did not turn. "Go," he said quietly. "Before I ask you another question you cannot answer without telling me the truth." She stood. She looked at him for one long moment. And then Seraphina Bianchi, the woman who had walked into his house 4 days ago to put a knife into his throat, curtsied and walked out of his dining room, and Dante Castellano sat alone at a table built for 20 and poured himself a second glass of wine with a hand that, for the first time in 11 years, was not entirely steady. She did not sleep that night. She sat on the narrow servant's bed in the third-floor quarters, still in her uniform, and she reached under the mattress for the thing she had kept hidden there since the day she arrived. It was a photograph. It was old, creased, and the edges had been handled soft over 23 years. It was the only photograph of her mother that existed in the world. Her grandmother had kept it in a locked drawer in the kitchen of their Hill Village house, and she had only allowed Seraphina to see it on one day each year, on the anniversary of the killing. The woman in the photograph was 20 years old. She had dark hair and a quiet smile, and she was standing in front of a harbor in the late afternoon light, and her eyes were gray. Seraphina held the photograph in the dark. She ran her thumb along the edge of it, the way her grandmother had done every night of the last 2 years of her life. She could hear her grandmother's voice. She could hear it more clearly in this room, in this house, than she had heard it since the funeral. "A Castellano killed your mother, Seraphina. Promise me." She had been 13 the first time her grandmother had put the photograph in her hands and made her say the words. She had said them. She had said them every year. She had said them the night her grandmother died, holding the old woman's hand in the hospital in Palermo, watching the monitor flatten. I promise, Nana, I promise." And her grandmother had closed her eyes and gone, and Seraphina had walked out of the hospital into a Sicilian morning that smelled of salt and lemons, and she had begun the work of finding the man her grandmother had sworn was the killer. It had taken her 18 months. She had used every skill she had spent her 20s learning in the houses of bad men. She had traced names through records, bribed clerks, followed rumors from Naples to Milan to Chicago. She had found him, Dante Castellano. The young heir her grandmother had said was the one. Seraphina pressed the photograph against her forehead in the dark. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong since the first day. The library. The man had not behaved like a killer. He had behaved like a grieving man. The painting she had seen in the hallway, the one of a woman with dark hair and a quiet smile and gray eyes and a Palermo harbor behind her. She had nearly dropped the silver tray when she saw it on her second day. It was a painting. It was a painting of her mother. Dante Castellano had a painting of her mother in his upstairs hallway. Seraphina had stood in front of that painting for 19 minutes on the morning of her second day. She had stared at it until Aldo had called up the stairs, and she had remembered to breathe. She had spent every hour since trying to reconcile what her grandmother had told her for 23 years with what her own eyes were telling her in this house. A man who had killed a girl did not hang a painting of her at the top of his staircase. A man who had killed a girl did not pace that hallway at 3 in the morning. She had watched him on her 5th night from the shadow of the service passage. She had watched him stand in front of the painting for an hour. He had spoken to it. She had not been able to hear the words. She pressed the photograph harder against her forehead. She whispered to it, in the dark, in the Sicilian of her childhood, "Mama, I do not know what is true. If this is the man, give me the sign. And if this is not the man, give me that one instead." The photograph did not answer. It never had. But somewhere below her, 3 floors down, the man she had come to kill was sitting alone at a table built for 20, and he was pouring himself wine with a hand that was not steady, and neither of them knew it yet, but they had both just begun to drown. The next morning, Dante did something he had not done in years. He canceled his meetings. He told Alda he would not be in the study. He did not explain. Alda did not ask. At 11 a.m., he walked into the library and found Seraphina sitting in his mother's old reading chair by the window, a book open in her lap. She stood the moment she saw him. "Sit, Signor. Sit, Seraphina. Read to me." "Signor, you have read every book in this library at least once in the last week." "I have been watching. You read the way a person reads who is looking for something specific. What are you looking for?" Her face did not move. "Signor, I do not. The Dumas, read it to me. In French." She looked at him for a long moment. And then, because she had been trained to obey a direct order from a man more powerful than her, and because obeying was how she had survived the last decade of her life, she sat back down in his mother's chair and opened the book and began to read. Her French was flawless. It was not the French of a woman who had learned it for work. It was the French of a woman who had been educated in it from childhood, in rooms with tutors, in the kind of rooms where a fisherman's daughter from Calabria would never have set foot. Dante sat across from her in his father's chair and closed his eyes and listened. His thumb started on the ring. 2 revolutions in. The ring stopped. His hand went still on the arm of the chair and did not move again for the next hour. He listened for an hour. He listened while the winter sun moved across the library floor and caught the gold lettering on the books behind her head. He listened to her voice the way a dying man listens to rain. When she finished the chapter, she closed the book. He did not open his eyes. "Seraphina." "Yes, Signor. Who taught you French?" Silence, a long silence. And then, softer than he had ever heard her speak, "I do not remember, Signor." "Another lie." "Yes." He opened his eyes. She was looking at him, really looking. And for the first time he saw that she was frightened, not of him, of herself, of what was happening in his library right now, of the fact that she had sat down to read to a man she was supposed to kill and she had not wanted the chapter to end. "Why are you afraid of me?" he asked quietly. "I am not afraid of you, Signor." "Then what are you afraid of?" She did not answer. She could not. "Tomorrow," Dante said, standing, "you will read to me again, same time." Same chair. "Yes, Signor." He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. Without turning around, he said, "Seraphina." "Yes, Signor. Whatever you came here for, whoever sent you, I am giving you one chance to walk out of this house alive. The car leaves for the city at 3. If you are in it, I will not come after you. I will not ask questions. I will let you go." Silence. He waited. "Do you understand me, Seraphina?" "Yes, Signor." He walked out. He did not look back. He did not have to. She went to the kitchen at 2:30. She went because she needed air and because she did not know where else to go. Alda was there, alone, kneading bread on the long wooden table. The old housekeeper did not look up. Seraphina stopped in the doorway. She stood there for a long time. Finally, Alda said, without lifting her eyes from the dough, "The car is at 3, Figlia." "Yes, Signora." "You should be in it." "Yes, Signora." Alda folded the dough over on itself. She pressed it down with the heel of her hand. The kitchen smelled of flour and lemons and something that had been simmering on the stove all morning. "I have been in this house for 41 years, Alda said quietly. "I was here when the Signora, his mother, came as a bride. I was here when he was born. I was here the morning his father died. I was the one who carried him out of the sunroom that morning with his face in my neck. I was here the year he brought the painting home from Sicily and hung it at the top of the stairs and told me that if any woman ever asked who the painting was of, I was to say it was his aunt. It is not his aunt. I have known this for 11 years. Seraphina's hand found the door frame. "Signora, I do not know who you are, Figlia. I do not know why you are in this house. I do not think you are a maid. I do not think Signora Rossi ever existed, and I do not care. I have lived in this family for 41 years, and I have watched that boy turn to stone in front of me, one layer at a time, for 11 of them. I have buried his father. I have buried his mother. I have buried the girl he was going to marry in absentia because he never let anyone speak her name again. I have watched him eat alone at that table for 4,000 nights." Alda finally looked up. Her eyes were watery blue, lined with the kind of wrinkles that came from a lifetime of keeping other people's secrets. Last night he poured wine for a woman for the first time since his mother died. This morning he canceled his meetings. He has never canceled his meetings, Figlia. Not in 11 years, not for the funeral of his own uncle, not for a broken arm, not for anything. She pressed her thumb into the dough. "I am telling you this because the car leaves at 3. You have 17 minutes. If you are the kind of woman who can be in that car, you should go. If you are the kind of woman who cannot, I would like to know, because tonight at dinner I will either be serving his wine or I will be scrubbing blood out of his library floor, and I would like to know which one to prepare for." Seraphina could not speak. "Figlia." "Yes. Look at me." Seraphina looked at her. "Whatever it is you think you came here to do, Whatever old wound is still open under your skin. Think about it for the next 17 minutes. Think very carefully. That boy upstairs is the last Castellano. The line ends with him. He is tired, Figlia. I have watched him be tired for 11 years. If you have come into this house to finish him, you will not have to work very hard. He is already most of the way there. But if you have come to do what I think you may have come to do, I want you to understand that I am 73 years old and I have seen many things, and I am telling you. On my soul, that a man who hangs a painting and talks to it for an hour at 3 in the morning is not the man your grandmother told you he was. Whatever she told you, whoever she was. Seraphina felt her knees go. She put her back against the door frame to keep standing. How did you? I did not. I am guessing. You have the eyes of the woman in the painting. I have been looking at that painting for 11 years. I would know those eyes in the dark, Figlia. I knew them the moment Signor Castellano walked you into the study yesterday morning. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked. The car is at 3, Alda said. She went back to her dough. I suggest you do not be in it. At 3 o'clock, Seraphina was polishing the candlesticks in the dining room. At 4, she was folding linens in the east wing. At 5, she was in the kitchen helping Alda with the evening service, and Alda did not meet her eyes, and both of them understood that a decision had been made that neither of them was going to speak aloud ever again. At 6, she brought Dante his coffee in the study. She set the cup on his desk. She folded her hands. She turned to leave. Seraphina. Yes, signor. Why did you stay? She stopped at the door. Her back was to him. He watched her shoulders rise and fall one time, very slowly, like a woman who had been holding her breath for hours and had just remembered she was allowed to exhale. Because you are the first man in the last 11 years, she said quietly, who has looked at me and seen the whole person. I have been invisible for a long time, signor. I did not know how much I wanted to be seen until you told me I could leave. She walked out. And Dante Castellano sat at his father's desk and stared at the steam rising from his coffee and felt, for the first time in a decade, a crack run through the ice in his chest. That was the night it started. It did not start with a kiss. It did not start with a touch. It started with a chapter in Dumas and a cup of coffee and an old woman kneading bread and a young woman who had been sent to kill a man choosing, for reasons she could not yet name, to stay. On the 6th morning, she made him laugh. It happened in the library. She was reading Dostoevsky to him in Russian. He had asked for it, testing her, and she had read for 20 minutes without stumbling over a single declension. He had closed his eyes and listened, and his ring had gone still on his finger the way it always did now when she read to him. When she finished the chapter, she set the book down. He opened his eyes. Your Russian is better than mine, he said. Your Russian is excellent, signor. Dante, where did you learn it? The cook at the Rossi household was from Kiev. She liked me. She taught me in exchange for help with the onions. It was a lie. He knew it was a lie. She knew he knew. The corner of her mouth moved in the smallest possible way. Signor Castellano, are you always this suspicious of women who can conjugate? It came out of her before she could stop it. She had not meant to say it. She had meant to stay invisible and stay safe, and give him the kind of deferential answers that a maid gave to a don. But the library was warm, and the sun was on the floor, and the man in the chair across from her had been listening to her read for 6 days with his eyes closed and his hand still, and something in her had slipped, just once, just for one sentence. She braced for the correction. She waited for the cold look, the reminder of her place, the frost that would come down between them and put her back on the other side of the service door where she belonged. It did not come. Instead, Dante Castellano made a sound. It was a small sound. It was barely a sound. It was a short exhale through the nose once, and then again, and then a third time, and then his shoulders shook once, and then he put his hand over his mouth, and Seraphina realized with a slow and astonished horror that the Don of Chicago was laughing. He was laughing at her. He was laughing with her. He was laughing the way a man laughs who has not used the muscles in 11 years and does not quite remember how they are supposed to work. The sound stopped almost as fast as it started. He lowered his hand from his mouth. He looked at her. His face had gone very strange. His eyes were wide. He looked for a moment exactly like a boy. What was that? He said quietly. Signor, that sound I just made. She did not know what to say. I believe it was a laugh, Dante. He was quiet for a long moment. His thumb found the ring. It did not turn. It rested there as if he had forgotten what his own hand was supposed to do with it. I have not heard that sound in a long time, he said. I did not know I still had it in me. It suits you, does it? Yes. He looked at her across the small table between their chairs. The sun was on her hair, his face was doing something she had not seen it do before. It was not quite a smile. It was the country that a smile might live in if a smile were ever allowed to stay. Read another chapter, he said. Dante, I have already read for an hour. Read another. She read another. He took her out of the uniform on the 10th day. He did it without ceremony. He simply had all to bring down a box of his mother's old clothes, things that had been in storage for 2 decades, and said to Seraphina, "If you are going to sit at my table, you will not sit there in a servant's apron. Pick what fits." Seraphina had looked at the dresses, at the silks and wools and furs that had belonged to a woman who had loved a Castellano and been loved in return, and something had happened behind her eyes that Dante did not entirely understand, but which he would remember later as the moment he first saw her cry. She did not cry out loud. She did not say anything. She simply touched the sleeve of a dark green dress and stood very still for a long time. "My mother wore that the night she met my father," Dante said quietly. "I remember, I was 7, she looked like a queen." Seraphina touched the sleeve again. "Signor Castellano, Dante." She looked up at him. "Dante." It was the first time she had said his name. It did something to him. It did something he had been pretending for 11 years could no longer be done to him. "Wear it tonight," he said. She wore it that night. And when she walked into his dining room in the dark green silk, her dark hair loose around her shoulders for the first time, her winter-gray eyes catching the candlelight, Dante Castellano set down the glass he was holding very carefully because he did not trust his hand. He did not pour her wine that night. He stood up when she entered. He pulled out her chair. He sat down across from her instead of at the head of the table, and when Alda came to serve the first course, Alda took one look at the two of them and quietly set down the tray and backed out of the room and did not return. They ate in silence for a long time. Finally, Seraphina said, "People will talk. Let them. Signor, Dante. Dante, you do not understand. The men in your organization, your uncles, they will see this. They will ask questions. Let them ask. They will say you have broken the vow. I have not broken the vow. They will say you have." He looked at her across the candlelight. "Seraphina, I have not touched you. No, I am not going to touch you." A small silence. She looked down at her plate. "No, do you understand why? Because of the woman in the painting upstairs." The candlelight moved on the table between them. Dante did not move. His thumb was still on the ring. It was not turning. "You have seen the painting." "Yes." "Hung it myself. It has been there 11 years. Aldo is the only person in this house who knows whose face is in the frame. I told her to say it was my aunt if anyone ever asked." "No one asks." "No, not in this house. I trained them not to." He reached across the table. He did not touch her hand. He stopped an inch short, the way a man stops an inch short of a hot stove when he remembers what it costs to burn. "Seraphina, look at me." She looked up. "The rumor about me is not true. I am not broken. I am a man who made a promise to the only woman I have ever loved, and I have kept it for 11 years, and I will keep it until I find the man who took her from me or until I die. I cannot break that promise. Not even for you, especially not for you." Her eyes filled. "I know, but I want you to understand something else. Yes, I have sat across from beautiful women for 11 years. I have had empresses of industry at my table. I have looked at all of them and felt nothing." He drew a breath. He let it out. "You are the first. In 11 years, you are the first." A tear slipped down her face. She did not wipe it away. "Dante," she whispered. "Yes. I cannot tell you why, but you should not love me. Do not love me, whatever this is." "Stop it now, please." "Why?" "Because I am going to break your heart." He looked at her for a long moment. "Seraphina, my heart has been broken for 11 years. You are not capable of breaking something that is already broken. You are the first thing that has made me believe it might heal." She went to her room that night and opened the locked drawer in the small bedside table. Inside, wrapped in a linen cloth, was the blade. It was not a large knife. It was thin and old, and its handle had been worn smooth by the grip of the woman who had trained Seraphina in its use, a retired Sicilian armorer's widow who had died 4 years ago. The blade was the reason Seraphina had been able to walk into this house. It was also the reason she had not slept well in 23 days. She took it out of the cloth. She held it flat across her palms. She looked at it for a long time. Then she wrapped it back in the linen. She put on her coat over her nightdress. She walked down the back staircase and out through the kitchen door, past the sleeping dogs in the boot room, out into the frozen garden, across the flagstones, all the way to the greenhouse at the far end of the walled garden where the gardener kept his tools. Behind the greenhouse there was a patch of soft earth where the gardener composted the summer's rose clippings. Seraphina knelt in the dirt in her nightdress and her coat. She dug with her hands. She dug until her fingers were numb and her knees were soaked through with freezing mud, and when the hole was deep enough, she put the linen-wrapped blade in it, and she covered it over, and she pressed the earth flat, and she whispered, "Nana, I am sorry. You were wrong. I am not going to do what you asked. I am going to do what she would have asked. Forgive me, or do not, I love you either way." She walked back to the house with her hands bleeding from the cold. She washed them in the servants' bathroom. She lay down on the narrow bed in the third-floor quarters and pulled the thin blanket up to her chin. She closed her eyes. Her hands stung. Her knees ached. Outside the small window, the wind moved across the lake. She breathed in. She breathed out. The house around her was quiet for the first time since she had entered it. Somewhere in the dark, she heard her own breathing slow, and she felt, beneath her ribs, the place where a weight had been sitting for 23 years. The weight was gone. She did not know when it had left. Maybe in the library, maybe in the kitchen with Alda, maybe in the garden just now with her hands in the frozen earth. She only knew that it was gone, and that she was tired, and that for the first time in her adult life she had nothing left she was required to do tomorrow that she did not want to do. She turned her face toward the window. She watched the first snowflake of the winter come down past the glass. She did not see the second one. She was already asleep. On the 14th day, she found him asleep in the library. She had gone in at dawn to open the curtains the way she did every morning now. He was in his father's chair. His head was tipped to the side. There was a book open on his chest, Dumas, the same volume she had read aloud to him on the first day. His left hand rested on the arm of the chair. The signet ring caught the light. He was not wearing his jacket. His collar was undone. His face in sleep was not the face of the dawn of Chicago. It was the face of a young man, a tired man, a man who had forgotten for a few hours to be terrible. Seraphina stood in the doorway and did not move. She stood there for a long time. She knew she should not be looking at him. She knew a servant who was caught staring at a sleeping master would be dismissed from any other house in the world. She could not stop looking. She had not known until this moment that Dante Castellano slept. She had assumed he did not. She had assumed he paced the upstairs hallway at 3 in the morning every night, the way she had seen him do on her 5th night, and that the ice in him kept him awake the way it kept everything else in him awake. She had not imagined him like this, soft-mouthed, dark-lashed, breathing through slightly parted lips, his throat bare, his face turned toward the light. She crossed the room quietly. She lifted the book from his chest. She marked the page with the green ribbon he kept in it and set it on the table beside his chair. She reached for the cashmere throw that was folded across the ottoman. She unfolded it. She laid it over him carefully from his knees to his shoulders. Her hand brushed his chest once very lightly through the wool. She stilled. He did not wake. She drew her hand back. She looked at him for one more long moment. She whispered, so quietly that her own breath almost covered the sound, *sleep, my love. Just this once. Sleep for both of us. She walked out. She did not know that he had heard her. She did not know that he had been awake for the last 30 seconds, that his breathing had stayed exactly the same because he had trained himself for 11 years to keep his breathing exactly the same when he was being watched, that his eyes had opened the moment she laid the blanket over him and had closed again only when he heard her hand brush the wool above his chest. She did not know that Dante Castellano lay in his father's chair for another hour after she left, and did not move, and did not turn the ring on his finger, and did not open his eyes, and did not trust himself to breathe at the normal rhythm, because he was listening to a single sentence replay itself inside his skull, over and over, in the voice of a woman who had come to his house to kill him. Sleep, my love, just this once. Sleep for both of us. He did not get up. He stayed in the chair. And for the first time in 11 years, Dante Castellano slept through the morning, under a blanket that a woman had laid across him, and did not dream. On the 18th day, Dante took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her. He did it in the rose garden, which was dead now under the November frost, the pruned stalks standing like dark bones in the snow. They had stopped by the sundial in the center of the garden. He had been telling her a story about his father. She had been listening. She had turned to him to ask a question, and he had reached out and taken her bare hand in his bare hand, and the world had stopped. He did not kiss her. He did not pull her toward him. He simply held her hand there in the cold in the dead garden under the November sky and looked at her. "I know I said I would not," he said quietly. "I know what I promised. I am not breaking it. I am just holding your hand." She could not speak. "Seraphina." "Yes. Tell me to stop." She looked at him, and she understood with a clarity that felt like drowning that this was the moment. This was her last chance. She could tell him right now. She could pull her hand away and step back and tell him who her mother was and who her father was and why she had come, and he would let her go. He would put her in a car and send her away, and the memory of this afternoon in the rose garden would be the only thing either of them ever had of each other. Or she could not tell him. She could lean forward. She could let this man, who had not loved a woman in 11 years, love her for one more day. She knew she should tell him. She knew it with every part of her, and she looked at his eyes and she saw, for the first time since she had known him, that they were not winter lake ice at all. They were the gray of the sky right before the snow came, the gray of something waiting to fall. "Do not stop," she whispered, and she leaned forward and she kissed him. It was a quiet kiss. It was not a kiss of fire or desperation. It was the kiss of two people who had been carrying something heavy for a long time, finally being allowed to set it down for a moment on a sundial in a dead rose garden in the middle of November. His hands came up very slowly and cupped her face. His thumbs brushed the tears she had not known were on her cheeks. He did not deepen the kiss. He did not pull her against him. He held her face as if she were the first living thing he had touched in a decade, because she was, and he kissed her softly once, twice, a third time, each one slower than the last, as though he were teaching himself the shape of what it meant to be a man who was allowed to kiss a woman again. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. "I was not going to do that. I know." Her name was Lucia. Seraphina felt every muscle in her body go rigid. She did not step back. She could not. His hands were still on her face. His eyes were closed. "I have not said her name out loud in 11 years, he whispered. "I could not. I thought if I said it, it would make her more gone. I am saying it now because I need you to hear it." Her name was Lucia. She was 20 years old. She was a baker's daughter from a hill village outside Palermo. She made the best bread I have ever eaten in my life. She laughed with her whole body. She could not dance. She stepped on my foot at the church festival the first night we met, and she said sorry the way a child says sorry, all in one breath, and I was already gone. I was 23 years old and I was already gone. We were going to be married in the spring. She was a week away from the engagement party when he stopped. He could not finish. Seraphina could hear him breathing, short, shallow breaths like a man in pain. "Do not say it," she whispered. "You do not have to say it." "She was found in the harbor," he said anyway. "In the water. I do not know why I am telling you. I have not told anyone. I am telling you because you asked me why I will not touch you, and you deserve the whole answer, not the half of it." His hands were trembling against her face. "I made her a promise at her grave. I promised her I would find the man who did it and open his throat with my own hands. I have been hunting that man for 11 years, Seraphina. I have never found him. I will never stop." He opened his eyes, the gray of the sky before the snow. "I am telling you this because I want you to know who I am. I am not a good man. I have a dead woman in my chest and a promise I cannot keep and a vow I will not break, and I am in love with you anyway, and I do not know what to do with that. I do not know what to do with that." Seraphina could not breathe. She could not breathe because the name he had just said aloud for the first time in 11 years was her mother's name. "Dante," she whispered. "Yes. I have to tell you something. Yes. Not here, not now, tonight, after dinner, in the library. Do you promise you will listen to the whole thing before you decide what to do?" He pulled back. He looked at her. "I promise." He took her hand and they walked back to the house in silence, through the dead roses, through the frozen courtyard, through the kitchen door where Alda was watching from the window and saw their joined hands and pressed her own hand to her mouth and turned away, because she had understood in that instant what Seraphina was about to do, and she did not know whether to pray or to weep, so she did both. She told him that night in the library in his mother's chair, with the fire going in the grate and a glass of wine untouched on the small table between them. She told him her real name. She told him her mother's name. She told him her father's name. She told him her grandmother's lie. She told him about the photograph under the mattress. She told him about the vow she had made at her grandmother's deathbed, the 18 months of searching, the false references, the blade she had buried behind the greenhouse. She told him how her father had killed her mother. She She told him he had done it under threat from a rival family who had promised to burn his village and kill every child in it. She told him her father had killed himself 2 months later when he found out Lucia had been pregnant, and that the grandmother who raised her had spent 23 years blaming the Castellano name for a death that had, at its root, been her own son's. She told him that she had come to his house to murder him. She told him that she had fallen in love with him instead. She told him all of it. And Dante Castellano sat in his father's chair across from her and did not move. He did not speak. His ring did not turn. His hand lay flat against the arm of the chair. He listened the whole way through, the way a man listens to a doctor tell him the results of a test he has been dreading for a long time. When she was finished, she sat very still with her hands folded in her lap, the way she had been sitting the first day he had met her. And she waited. The fire cracked in the grate. The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside, the first snow of the winter began to fall against the leaded glass windows. Dante stood up. He walked to the fireplace. He stood with his back to her for a long time, one hand on the mantel, his head bowed. She could not see his face. She could not see whether he was going to turn around and call for Alda and have her removed, whether he was going to turn around and put his hands around her throat, whether he was going to turn around and tell her to walk out of his house and never come back. When he finally turned, she saw that his face was wet. He had been crying silently the whole time. "Seraphina, yes, come," she stood. She crossed the library. She stopped in front of him. He looked down at her for a long moment. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He tried again. "The man who killed her. Yes, is dead. Yes, has been for 11 years. Yes." Dante put his hand over his own mouth. He pressed it there. He did not speak for a long time. When he finally lowered his hand, his voice came out rough and uneven, not the voice of the dawn, the voice of the boy who had buried a girl in a hill village in Sicily when he was 23 years old. I have been chasing for 11 years, a ghost. I have been promising her grave, a thing I could not ever do. Yes, my vow is. Yes, it has been broken since the day." He could not finish the sentence. He put his hand over his mouth again. His shoulders shook. Seraphina reached up. She covered his hand with her own. "It was never yours to finish," she whispered. "It was never. I did not know. I know. I did not know, Seraphina. I have been punishing myself for 11 years for a thing I could not. I know, Dante, I know." She pulled his hand down from his mouth. She held it in both of hers. He was crying openly now. He had not cried since the morning he found her mother in the harbor, and something in him had locked, and the lock had been turning itself 11 years, and now the lock was breaking, and everything that had been held back behind it was coming through at once. She pulled him down to her. She put her arms around him. The dawn of Chicago, the frozen dawn, the man who had ordered 3 rivals into their graves before he was 30, stood in his mother's library in the arms of a woman who should have been his enemy, and he wept into her hair like a boy. She held him. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Finally, he lifted his head. His face was a ruin. His eyes were red. His beautiful cold face had broken open, and something alive was looking out of it for the first time in a decade. "Seraphina. Yes, you came here to take a life. Yes, you gave me back one instead. Dante, I am not in love with you despite." He stopped. He shook his head. He tried again. "Because you stopped when you could have. I did not stop for 11 years, and you stopped. Yes, because of that, because of that." She touched his face. She pressed her thumb against the wet line on his cheek. "Say it," she whispered. "I love you." It came out broken, in 3 pieces. Like 3 stones being set down one at a time on the floor of a house that had been empty for a long time. "I love you too," she whispered. He kissed her. This time it was not a quiet kiss. This time it was a kiss of 2 people who had been keeping vows over graves for most of their lives, finally letting the dead rest. His hands were in her hair. Her hands were on his face. The fire cracked in the grate. The snow fell against the leaded glass. And Dante Castellano, the frozen dawn, the man the world had laughed at for 5 years because they believed he could not love a woman, kissed the first and only woman he had loved in 11 years, in the library of his mother's house, while the first snow of the winter fell on the dead roses in the garden outside. When he finally pulled back, he did not let her go. He held her against him, her head against his chest, and he whispered into her hair the only thing he had ever wanted to say to a living woman and had been forbidden to say for a decade. "Stay, Seraphina. Stay in this house. Stay in it. It is yours. It has belonged to you since the moment you walked through the door." They were married in the spring. They were married quietly in the garden where he had first taken her hand, in front of the sundial where she had first kissed him, under an arch of white roses that had been replanted that March in the place where the dead ones had stood all winter. Alda cried through the whole ceremony. Dante did not turn the ring on his finger once. His hand rested in Seraphina's hand, and it did not need to. Their first child was a daughter. They named her Lucia. Dante held her in the library on the night she was born, and he looked at Seraphina in her mother's green dress, and he looked at the painting at the top of the stairs, and he did not say anything, because there was nothing left to say. Behind the greenhouse, in a patch of soft earth that had been pressed flat by a young woman's hands on a November night, the first white rose of the season bloomed directly above the place where a blade was buried. It bloomed again the next spring, and the spring after that, every year, for the rest of their lives.